Berita cerita kita ni hanya di Astro AWANI.
Good evening, you're tuning into AWANI tonight with me, Farhana Sheikh. We will be exploring the topic of food security. First up, the government is looking to reduce the country's dependency on food imports. And are flexible price ceilings feasible? That's coming up. The Prime Minister Datuk Sri Ismail Sabri Yaakob said the government is looking into decreasing the country's dependence on its neighbours by beefing up the nation's food security. In order to do so, the government will seek the assistance of the National Farmers Organisation, NAFAS, and the Malaysian National Cooperative Movement, ANKASA. The two groups will be involved at every stage of chicken production. NAFAS aims to control 20% of the market with production numbers of around 144 million chickens a year, while ANKASA aims to breed 30 million chickens a year. An area of 12,140 hectares in Kelantan and Terengganu was identified by NAFAS to be used for planting corn. On the other hand, ANKASA has identified areas totaling 4,000 hectares throughout the country that can accommodate around 20% of the import needs for corn grain in the next 5 years. Still on the issue of chicken supplies, Malaysia has partially lifted its ban on chicken exports, with at least one poultry producer in Singapore now able to bring in live chickens across the causeway. The Straits Times reports that importer Ki Song Food has been allowed to resume importing live kampung chicken and black chicken.
The company's head of business development, James Sim, told the newspaper it had a letter from the Department of Veterinary Services. It states that the Malaysian government has agreed to allow exports of black chicken and kampung chicken, following a cabinet decision on June 8th. Exports of poultry products such as hot dogs and nuggets are also allowed to resume. However, the export ban on commercial broiler chicken, which make up the bulk of Singapore's imports from Malaysia, remains in effect. Malaysia imposed a ban on chicken exports on June 1st to ensure sufficient supply in the domestic market. Singapore imports around 34% of its chicken supply from Malaysia, almost all of which is brought in live and then slaughtered locally.
The government is mulling to introduce flexible price ceilings depending on price input factors. As an example, the price of chicken would depend on the price of corn, water and equipment for farming. We asked economist Dr. Carmelo Ferlito on whether this method is feasible to ensure food security.
If you are in the market of raw materials, you go to buy, in example, corn, but when you buy corn, you will accept a certain price for corn because you expect the final price of chicken to give you a profit over the cost of that raw materials. So the government is thinking like if consumer prices are a function of input prices, but it's actually the other way around. Input prices are determined by expectations on future consumer prices. So these are based on the expectations that entrepreneurs have with regard to their production process, and with that expectations in hand, they go to buy the input. So you enter a vicious circle, so you will have at the end no actual prices working in the system, because it will be just a figure determined by some bureaucrat and not an actual price emerging by the interaction of supply and demand. And if you don't get a market price, you will mess up all production decisions, because production decision will be based on wrong signals. And paradoxically, you can get in the market products that the market don't want, and what actually the market wants is not produced.
Prime Minister Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri Yaakob has expressed the country's plans to expand the Agrofood Ecosystem for inclusive food security in the country. Here are Dr. Carmelo's suggestions on how to achieve this.
First of all, we have to be realistic of what can be produced on Malaysian soil and what cannot. So don't get stuck in producing something for which the climate condition, the soil conditions are not suitable, because then you are ended up only producing more expensive products, like it happened in the case of corn for Indonesia. So be sure that you produce something that is profitable to be produced. And second, restructure the agriculture sector, removing, in example, subsidies. What is keeping the rice industry at bay in this moment is the system of subsidies that make the industry dependent on government assistance. So contrary to the poultry industry, which is instead very developed, the rice industry remained very much lacking behind and never step up, because it was structured in a way to depend on subsidies. As far as we don't remove this kind of distortions in the market, there will be no incentive for local producers to step up and get what the market needs.
The Inland Revenue Board of Malaysia has traced over 31,000 entities comprising individuals, businesses, companies and others who have yet to declare their actual incomes. The amount of direct tax leakage suffered by the country was estimated at 665 million ringgit and could have dire consequences to the country's economic stability. The IRB said the entities, which includes 23,751 individuals, are advised to voluntarily appear at their nearest IRB branches to register their income tax files and declare their income. A grace period of 1 month beginning June 15 would be given, with tax audits as well as civil and criminal investigation awaiting those who had failed to file tax declaration forms, submitted false statements and evaded tax after the deadline. Criminal probes would result in charges being filed under the Income Tax Act 1967 for non-compliance and tax evasion. A group of legal experts, researchers and officials from the federal and Sabah governments will be in London to search and study any references related to the state's rights under the Malaysia Agreement 1963. Led by Minister in the Prime Minister's Department for Sabah and Sarawak Affairs, Datuk Seri Dr. Maximus Ongkili, the team is scheduled to leave for the week-long trip on June 19th.
According to him, preliminary research showed over 300 documents referring to the rights and matters related to the MA63 are at the National Archives in London. He added that since MA63 is not just an agreement, therefore Malaysia needs all the facts and figures to enable Sabah and Sarawak to make claims that are rightfully theirs. Ongkili also stressed that it was vital for the team to do their homework so the rights of Sabah and Sabahans are protected.
Many high-profile data leaks have not led to changes in legislation or security architecture. Is the complacency due to a lack of accountability? Tonight on Consider This, we ask our guests who is responsible. We go for a quick break. Stay with us.
Cukup rasa, tak kenal tak cinta. Lagi cukup rasa, jadi launya apa jua. Hebat-hebat rasa, Maggi cukup rasa.
COVID-19 memperlihatkan kepada kita betapa pantasnya adaptasi teknologi di kalangan PKS kita. Niaga AWANI dan Unified Business akan menyelami perjalanan kebangkitan semula PKS kita melalui segmen Jiwa SME setiap Selasa dan Khamis untuk inspirasi anda.
Transformasikan perniagaan dengan Unified Business, rakan digital pilihan anda. Hubungi kami sekarang dan jimat sehingga 50%. Jom Unified Business.
Welcome back. A Cambodian-American lawyer and dozens of members of a now-dissolved opposition party were convicted of treason. This was the latest move to tame all opposition to the long-running rule of Prime Minister Hun Sen. Lawyer Terry Seng had declined to enter the court building, instead awaiting for the verdict outside. She and most of the other defendants had been charged over a failed attempt by the leader of the defunct Cambodia National Rescue Party to return from exile in 2019. Cambodian authorities blocked Sam Rainsy's return and alleged the 60 defendants were involved in organizing his trip, which Terry Seng and the others have denied. Cambodian courts are widely believed to be under the influence of Hun Sen, whose authoritarian style of rule has kept him in power for 37 years. The Cambodian National Rescue Party was his party's biggest rival, before it was disbanded by a court ruling just ahead of national elections in 2018 that resulted in a clean sweep by Hun Sen's Cambodia People's Party. The journalists at the courts managed to speak to Terry, dressed as Lady Liberty in a light green gown and a crown with freedom written on it before her verdict was announced.
I am ready for the sham verdict that will be announced this morning, which will be a guilty verdict. I am ready and prepared to go to the notorious Cambodian prisons for my political opinions, for my beliefs. For my belief in democracy, for my belief in freedom. I am ready to pay the price of prison in order that I live out my conscience and my belief in freedom, in justice.
Terry Seng was sentenced to 6 years in jail, and the others received sentences of 5 to 8 years. Meanwhile, Sri Lanka has approved a 4-day work week for civil servants to encourage them to grow food and help them cope with a chronic fuel shortage. This comes as the country, which employs about 1 million people in the public sector, struggles with its worst financial crisis in decades.
Sri Lanka has been hit by a foreign exchange shortage, leaving the nation struggling to pay for critical imports of food, fuel and medicine. Its 22 million population has had to endure long queues at petrol stations and power cuts for months. The cabinet on Monday allowed public sector workers to be given leave every Friday for the next 3 months. Meanwhile, the government is in talks for a bailout package with the International Monetary Fund, and a delegation is expected in Colombo on June 20th.
The Canadian government will announce an end to COVID-19 vaccine mandates for domestic travel and outgoing international travel. However, it may bring back the vaccine mandate if a new variant of the virus is discovered.
Some of Canada's COVID-19 curbs have included barring the unvaccinated from travelling on airplanes, as well as vaccine mandates for federal civil servants. Last week, the country suspended random COVID-19 testing at all its airports for the rest of June. This was to ease long waiting times that travellers have been facing.
China must lift its sanctions on Australia in order to improve relations between the two countries. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said this during the first talks between ministers from the two countries in almost 3 years.
China is Australia's largest trading partner and biggest customer for its iron ore, its largest export earner. But diplomatic relations have strained in recent years. China has listed 14 grievances with Australia, ranging from its call for an international inquiry into the origins of the coronavirus, a ban on China's telecommunications giant Huawei building a 5G network, and screening foreign investment for national security risks. Albanese, who was recently sworn into office, said any further warming of relations with the Chinese government would depend on the removal of trade sanctions and barriers on Australian exports. Australia's former government described China's sanctions on its agriculture and energy commodities as economic coercion. China's foreign ministry said Albanese had responded to a message of congratulations from Chinese Premier Li Keqiang on his election win last month, adding that it too wanted to see action for ties to improve.
That's all we have for you on Awani tonight. I'm Farhan Ashe. We'll see you again.